Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg did not take vacation. I did, and apparently the whole world ended while I was gone, but it's good to be back, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, I guess a few things going on in Nashville with the football team since they last played a football game, and who knows, maybe a few more things will be happening in the next couple of days. I guess we'll find that out as well.
Indeed, it's entirely possible that we're talking about a very different collection of players when next we meet, but for the
Right.
time being, the only move that has gone down as of 3 p.m. Wednesday officially is the Kevin Byard trade to the Philadelphia Eagles. But I want to start, Greg, with the quarterback situation here in Nashville.
Right.
Ryan Tannehill gets hurt against the Ravens. Malik Willis goes in. Will Levis is reportedly going to be the starter, but there is a scenario in which both of them could see playing time. I want to start with the two players first before we talk about the viability of that in an NFL offense. Will Levis, we haven't seen a ton of him, very small sample size in the preseason, but obviously you were very, very familiar with him throughout the course of the pre-draft process.
Yeah. You know, let's put it this way. I think there's much to potentially like about Will Levis. I think he's a certain kind of player. I think he needs the system to be really defined for him so that the reads are clean. Now, obviously, that cannot happen on every snap, as you well know. You know, there's a defense out there as well. There's going to be difficult yardage situations, 2nd and long, 3rd and long, where the defense will have the tactical advantage, and it's more difficult to play quarterback in the NFL for a young player. But I think Levis throws a good ball. There are times his ball placement is not as precise as you would like. We'll see if that's the kind of thing over time that can be, subtly and meaningfully improved. But I think that if Will Levis were to be the starter, which it seems to be the case that he will, I think he's the kind of quarterback that needs to play through games and make the mistakes, which is always easy for an outsider like me to say because you're still trying to win football games. But I think if you ultimately believe, which judging by the draft choice and the trade up to get him, you would think that the Titans' present organization believes that he could become that guy. I think you need to allow him to work through all that. And it's going to take a little time. He's going to make some head-scratching mistakes. And you got, like I said, it's easy for me to say, but you almost have to live with it.
And in theory, he should now have the opportunity to do that. Unfortunate that Tannehill gets hurt, but we know that the high ankle sprain is probably going to keep him out, especially with a short week coming up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's entirely
it's a Thursday
possible.
night game. So again, you're dealing with, again, this is my personal opinion. I've been doing this a long time. I've spoken to a lot of coaches over the years. Obviously, watching tape for 30 years now. I've been watching NFL coaching tape, 30 plus. I formed my own, point of view about this. I don't think it's beneficial to play multiple quarterbacks in the same game. That's just my opinion. I know it sounds good. Hey, we've got a plan for both. I think quarterbacks have to work through games. I don't think they can learn and grow by not doing that. Again, a personal opinion based on my own sense of tape study and conversations many I've had through the years. That doesn't mean that others, don't, they might disagree with me. That's fine. But I think both Levis and Willis, whoever you choose, they are both the kinds of quarterbacks that are going to make mistakes. Now, they might make different kinds of mistakes. Levis, to me, is the kind of quarterback that's going to throw some bad picks. Willis, to me, is the kind of quarterback he just doesn't see. Even when he came in the game a couple of weeks ago, same issues presented themselves. He just doesn't see things. But you have to let that play out. Look, do I think Willis can become a great quarterback? I personally don't, but I can't say that with 100% certainty. He would need to play a whole hell of a lot more snaps for a definitive judgment to be made. But that judgment can't be made if he's being shuttled in and out of the lineup. So again, I'm just giving you my point of view. I think you got to pick the one. And by the way, they've been with him every day since they drafted Levis. And so they clearly have an opinion. Now, Levis has not played in a game yet. Willis, they do have that sample size to some degree. But Buck, as well as I do, they have an opinion. So they think one guy's better than the other. They're not each at 50% exactly. They think one guy's better. Whoever that is, that guy needs to play.
Yeah, Mike Vrabel sure as hell isn't going to tell us though, and there's no benefit obviously.
He
To
doesn't need to
doing
tell
that.
us. That's no. Mike Vrabel does not need to say anything about that. He just needs to put a guy out there Sunday. Is it a 1 o'clock game?
It's a 1 o'clock game.
Sunday at 1 o'clock is when he needs to let everybody know that he doesn't need to tell you anything.
Certainly, and so we'll see, because he has said, Greg, that both quarterbacks will play to an extent, and I did think that there was, at least from the fan base, a visceral reaction, like, from what you just said, why not just see what Levis has to offer? And I want to come back to Malik on that note, because he did get dropped in there. He's been in some pretty unenviable situations
Without question.
here in Tennessee. That the Ravens game was no different. Tannehill leaves, Malik plays in the fourth quarter. And again, the issues arise. I guess the thing for me, Greg, and I listened to your 3HL hit while I was catching myself back up, coming back from vacation, that it's the same mistakes that we're seeing him make.
It is. And again, he's put in a difficult situation. So what I'm saying is not a definitive statement for the rest of his career. It could be, but it may not be. But there's still too many concerning snaps in which he does not process the routes versus the coverage, with the result that he does not turn the ball loose to open receivers. He doesn't really have an intuitive pocket feel. He's overly reactive to any opposing jersey color. Now, he will make a play doing that on occasion because he can run. But for a guy that can move really well, he doesn't have great vision on the move. And that's, another potential issue. So again, is this a defining moment in his career? Am I saying he should never see the field? Of course, I'm not saying that, Buck. But, if you want him to work through all that, you've got to let him play games. If he's the guy you think is the guy, then you got to let him play games. Now, by the way, I think it's worth mentioning who they're playing, because Atlanta is a really difficult defense to play against. They are really multiple. They do a great job with disguise and late rotation. Whoever plays, and it sounds like both might, whoever plays is going to have bad snaps in this game. I'm telling you that right now, because Atlanta's defense, they're a very fun watch for a football nerd like me, because they do a lot of really cool things on defense. They don't have a true edge rusher, the one guy that you say, oh man, we got to stop him or else he can wreck our game. They don't have that guy. But they are so good with the fact that their pre-snap and post-snap looks are totally different, and you know how hard that is for a young, inexperienced quarterback.
Yeah, I think everybody is mentally prepared to see whomever it is start for the Titans or play primarily for the Titans on Sunday struggle to an extent. So as good a transition as any to Atlanta, Greg, that is going to be the next opponent. The Falcons have invested in their defense, in particularly their secondary, as you mentioned, coming into this season. That's paid dividends for them so far. You mentioned the things that make Atlanta's defense difficult. What did you make of the game between them and the Buccaneers, if you've had the opportunity to break that down?
Yeah, no, I've seen every Atlanta, game this year pretty much. Let's stay on their defense. Yeah. One of the things that's really stood out, and it's given their coordinator Ryan Nielsen, who came from Dennis Allen in New Orleans. So there's a lot going on there, because we know what Dennis Allen has done over the years, just from a tactical perspective. So Ryan Nielsen's doing a lot. But they've got an outstanding corner play from A.J. Terrell and Jeffrey Okudah. So they do a lot of things where they'll let those two corners, Buck, match up man-to-man on the outside, but then on the inside, they have all these sort of hybrid zone match looks, which are difficult to decipher. And that's the point I'm making is, someone like Levis could come in and think, oh, it looks like man. And then you make a throw and oops, it's not really man. And you throw it right to between the numbers of a defender. That kind of stuff's going to happen. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it can easily happen. And that's how you learn from things. But they've gotten really strong corner play. I think their linebackers, they predominantly play Caden Ellis, who was with New Orleans a year ago, and Landman, number 53, and they played well. They depending on the opponent, they'll play snaps of 3-2 dime and 4-1 dime. It all depends on the opponent. They play a lot of dime. Alford's done a really nice job for them in the slot. They've got two really good safeties in Bates and Grant. And, they're just a difficult defense to play against tactically and conceptually. So, it's not a good game for either quarterback in terms of what they're going to see.
Yeah, Arthur Smith on the other side of things with the offense. Greg, obviously Titans fans intimately familiar with Arthur.
We know what he
during
does. Yeah, we
his
know
long.
Yeah,
he and they're going to be and they have been a physical group up front. They invested in their offensive line. The question for them and for everybody moving forward is probably the quarterback position right now. I mean, Desmond Ridder had ball security issues, obviously, in this past game, but they're just asking him to execute enough. There are throws that he misses, but for the most part, they seem to be getting as much as humanly possible out of him.
And he played arguably his best game this past week against a good Bucs defense.
Yeah.
He was decisive overall with his reads and his throws. He was not tentative. Some throws are predetermined. He's still at that point, Buck, where, the play call says, hey, this is what we expect the primary to be, and he's going to throw it. And, sometimes the primary is not quite as available as the play call hoped. But he was much more decisive. He made some really good throws this week, and we know he has movement ability. In some ways, what you're seeing with Ridder is exactly what he was in college. He was a 4-year starter at Cincinnati, and he incrementally improved every year. He's one of those kinds of guys. There'll be incremental improvement. There'll be some positives. Then maybe next week will be a little bit of a negative, and then the positive will be a little better, and then there'll be, another negative. But, that's the kind of guy he is. And again, I don't know where he'll end up on the spectrum. I'm not going to sit here and say, in 2 years, he'll be a top 5 guy. I'm not saying that at all, but I think you'll see incremental improvement from him. And again, having said that, he could come out and throw a really bad pick on the third play. You never know. But, I think that he's starting to look like he belongs. And by the way, Charles London, the quarterback coach for the Titans, was his quarterback coach a year ago in Atlanta. And I had the opportunity to talk to Charles about him when I was down there, and he thinks he can end up being a pretty solid player.
Yeah, and certainly that's at least we're starting to see more and more evidence of that on a week-by-week basis with Ridder. He'll be facing, if not a different Titans defense, a little bit different personnel. Kevin Byard obviously no longer here with the team. Sounds like Elijah Molden is going to get that opportunity to start alongside Amani Hooker, Greg. Yeah. And they also acquired Terrell Edmonds, who was on a 1-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles, a role player, it seems, having only started 3 of their games this year, but has seen a good amount of snaps throughout the course of his career as a former first-round pick. I want to start with Edmonds, if we could.
Sure.
What do you know about him as a player, and how might you see him deployed within this defense?
Yeah, I know a lot. He obviously started and played in Pittsburgh for years before Philly signed him. He's a certain kind of player, Buck. He's more of almost a hybrid safety linebacker. He's not really a back-end player. Like, he couldn't take Byard's spot and do what Byard is asked to. And now Byard's just a better player, obviously, but I'm talking about traits and stylistically. He couldn't do those things that Kevin Byard can do. Molden theoretically can, not as good as Byard, obviously, but at least he can kind of do those kinds of things. His body and his traits allow him to do that. Edmonds could fill a role. And again, I don't know how they plan on using him. Who knows if he's even active this week? You don't even know that. But he almost strikes me as more like your dime linebacker. That kind of player, more than a safety who can play on the back end and do the things that the Titans ask their safeties to do.
A good note there. And I would not expect him to be active, but we'll see how he handles the week of practice. Mike Vrabel's not above tossing players out there who just got here. So,
I mean, he does have a lot of experience in the league. He's not a newbie.
And Vrabel tends to err on the side of experience, certainly with personnel decisions that way. Then to Kevin Byard, Greg, obviously, Titans fans beat up about it, but I think most people understand where this team is right now and that assets are a priority, or trying to recoup assets as they get ready for whatever the next iteration of this team looks like. Byard goes to Philadelphia. Yeah. How do you see him fitting in that defense?
Well, let me just say one thing. I know the fan base in every city wants their team to, have a chance to win and compete every Sunday and theoretically get to the playoffs and have a chance for a Super Bowl. Sometimes they're realistic. And I think this team with a new GM, and I'm sure there's plenty of meetings that have been going on probably since Rand got there, but even more so over these last number of months, that, hey, here's where we are. We've got a 35-year-old quarterback. We've drafted 2 in the last 2 years. we've have a running back who's getting up there in years. Probably his best years are behind him. We need to adjust how we go forward. Given the conference that we're in and the teams that we would have to leapfrog if we want to get to where we want to go. So I think it's a realistic approach. Now, none of us know how it will come out. That remains to be seen. But I think the way they played stylistically, while it led to some success, clearly, they were an AFC conference championship finalist, 2019, I believe, which might seem like a long time ago. It did work for a while, but it's probably run its course stylistically just because players get older, and it's probably not the way you're going to beat the teams you need to beat in the AFC. So this move is necessary. Again, I'm not saying they should just, have a fire sale and just get rid of everybody for 7th round picks, but they need to have some serious conversations, which are always hard. And I think fans lose sight of the fact that it's hard for the people involved. I mean, Kevin Byard, you know him well. I've never met him. But from everything I've read, he is a class act and a great guy. And I guarantee it's not easy for a Mike Vrabel or whoever it is to have to say goodbye to Kevin Byard. These are still human beings that are involved in all this. But this is the nature of professional sports. We all, we know that. But talking about Byard and Philly, they need safeties big time. And Philly is a championship caliber team. They were in the Super Bowl a year ago, easily could have won it. They look like they're that kind of team again this year without question. And they need safeties. And he'll come in here and he'll love being here because they've got an awesome defensive front. They score points. I mean, he'll be excited by the fact that literally every week this team puts up 30. That's the way it goes here in Philly.
Yeah, no, it's a great landing spot for Kevin. I'm personally happy for him to get an opportunity to get a real crack at contending, seeing as this situation is clearly on the decline. Now, Greg, I do want to mention, since we talk about realistic conversations with the fan base, Derrick Henry is still currently a member of the Tennessee Titans. We don't know what lies ahead specifically, but there is starting to be rumblings of more momentum towards moving him. So we'll see what happens between now and the next time that we talk. But if there was a team that you would like to see Derrick Henry on, or that you think particularly fits his skill set, or that he brings value to, is there one that comes to mind off the top of your head?
I think that's limited to some degree because Derrick Henry is a foundation back who doesn't give you much more than just handing the ball off to Derrick Henry. Now, and I would say, and I'm sure he would disagree and maybe others would, but I would say that he's, more on the downside than the upside. I don't think he looks exactly the same. Now, does that mean he can't have a 20 carry, 140-yard game? Of course it doesn't mean that. But I don't know if he's your bell cow anymore. And because he's a certain kind of back, you're probably limited in a team that would be interested. I mean, I think a team that probably, Baltimore would come to mind. I think they'd be looking for a back since Dobbins is done for the year. Edwards is a really solid player. Justice Hill is a nice player in their scheme. But, I think they would probably like to have that kind of player since they still play with Picard, the 300-pound fullback. So, I think that's one possibility. As I think about other teams, I don't know, but
it's tough
because teams don't really play like that. I mean, if you trade for Derrick Henry, aren't you pretty much saying he's now the guy? I mean, are you trading for Derrick Henry to give him 7 carries a game?
You can't. He's already become a role player here, and I think that's a role player to an extent. I mean, obviously we know what Derrick does well, but he has a very it's kind of like Liam Neeson and Taken. He's got a very particular set of skills, and
there you go.
Those skills, you know what I'm saying?
And you don't want to know about that skill set because it's not going to end up well for you. Right.
That's right. That's exactly right. So I think that's kind of the nature of the Derrick Henry situation. What actually comes to pass, we will see.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, but I hope fans understand that if he is traded, first of all, I hope fans understand that you're not getting a 1st or 2nd round pick. So just because of what Derrick Henry's accomplished in his past, which is, all Hall of Fame type for 4 or 5 years, and obviously the most dominant runner in the league for 4 or 5 years, that's not the way he is now, and you're not going to get a 1st or 2nd round pick. If they can get a 4th round pick, Buck, I think they would jump at it.
I know that is indeed the case. So like I said, we'll see what comes to fruition. A quick note, of course, the NFL matchup show each and every Sunday to get you
we
ready.
Carry on, Buck. We carry on.
Indeed, you do. Now, the one game that I'm assuming is going to be on the matchup show. I don't know which unit the piece is on, but San Francisco and Cincinnati, is that in the show?
It is in the show. Darius is actually going to do a piece on the Bengals defense, believe it or not. They're very good on third down. So, yeah, he's going to take a look at that. We have New England, Miami. We have Cleveland, Seattle, which may not be a big national radar game, but it's probably one of the most intriguing games of the weekend. We're going to take a look, amazingly enough, at Patrick Mahomes. We're going to go into the weeds a little bit on him. Jacksonville, Pittsburgh is a really big game, as you know, in the AFC. Philly, Washington. Rams at Dallas, a really big game, and then Cincinnati, San Francisco.
So just on that last game, Greg, Brock Purdy has been ruled out with a concussion, so it's Sam Darnold who is going to be the starting.
Purdy is out, that's definite?
Schefter just put it out while we've been taping the podcast.
Really?
With Brock Purdy in concussion protocol, Niners quarterback Sam Darnold now is in line to start Sunday's game.
Oh, I see. He's in. Yeah, so we don't. Yeah, I guess theoretically he could be cleared, but I guess that usually doesn't happen in 1 week.
Yeah, and the fact that he's, at least to our knowledge, having just been recently placed in the protocol does not.
I wonder when that. I mean, it didn't seem like it hit the other, during the game. So he must have awakened, today, or something happened.
Indeed. So with that being said, and you mentioned Seattle as an interesting game, Seattle and Cleveland. PJ Walker will be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns in that game, as Kevin Stefanski said earlier. Is there anything in particular that intrigues you about those two players in these respective settings, Walker and Darnold?
I would say I'm really intrigued about Darnold. More, Walker's played. Darnold is fascinating to me because Darnold has always been a guy, I think, that would be viewed as having, he's the number 3 pick in a draft, as having first-round talent. And, for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. I'm sure many people have their opinions. I don't have a strong opinion because I wasn't in the building in those places. I think Darnold's a guy that has always, at times, not seen it as clearly as you would like him to see it. But we know in the 49er offense that they really present it cleanly for the quarterback. So I'm probably most intrigued by that to see if he can step in, because he's certainly got a bigger arm than Purdy. I don't think he's not as good a timing anticipation thrower as Purdy, but I'd be very anxious to see him in that offense. And we know Debo will be out again, so they're not going to have all their weapons.
Fascinating week 8 of football. The Tennessee Titans, a science experiment among the rest of them, but it's going to be, there will be football games played like the NFL matchup show. The season soldiers on, and so will we here on the podcast. Greg, it's great to be back with you. Always enjoy talking ball, and certainly we'll have football to talk about next week. I don't know what it's going to look like.
Among possibly other things.
Among possibly other things is very, very correct. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.